Okay, so this is the last item. So we have 4 items that we have to juggle. Ionic, which is the first thing we did in class, very common. Acids, talked about those in the first video. Then molecular, second video, and last the hydrates. Okay, so the hydrates are just another variation of the standard ionic compound. So what you want to think of these as is this. A hydrate is kind of like we took the ionic rules and we blended them with the molecular rules. So like half of it is ionic, half of it is molecular, and we have kind of rules from both. So this is sort of like the hybrid. It has a bit of everything, and so that's why the hydrates are kind of weird and wonky. But they're really, really easy to spot. So how do you identify them? Well, they're either going to have this in their formula, a dot and a number and water. So like dot 7H2O or dot 3H2O. So they're going to have something like that in their formula. So a dot and 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 a water after it. Okay. Or they're going to just literally say the word hydrate. And so it's like, oh, it says acid, it's an acid. It says hydrate, it's a hydrate. Okay. So what we're going to do is we got 2 sets of rules that we're juggling. So the first part, this piece, the first part you're going to name with our standard ionic rules. The second part is going to be named using prefixes. So this is going to be named copper 2 sulfate. So that's our standard stuff. So you've got copper and you got sulfate. Now this is kind of hard, but sulfate's a -2 and copper's a +2. So what happened, the reason you don't see those, like you don't see them in the formula, right? You're like, well, where the heck's the 2's? They canceled. That's like really tricky for students. It's like, oh, it's a copper 2, because basically what it looked like was this, Cu2SO4 2, but you cancel these and you end up with the formula you see there. So copper, Roman numeral 2 sulfate, normal stuff, Roman numerals, crisscrossing, all that good stuff. And then at the end, instead of saying water, copper sulfate, 5 waters, we say copper sulfate, penta for 5, and then the word hydrate is what replaces the H2O. All right, so the tricky thing on these is just juggling the ionic piece. I mean, that's where people get most of it wrong. Everybody pretty much gets that right. Pentahydrate, not a big deal. It always says hydrate. It's just the prefix in front. Now that dot, let's talk about that. This does not mean multiplication. That dot separates the ionic from the molecular. That is not math. So that is not multiplication. So do not multiply. It is not telling you to multiply. Forgot my eye there. It's not telling you to multiply. Okay, so when you're doing these, do not do any kind of weird math stuff, because it's not a math problem. It's a naming problem. There's no math here. Okay, so hopefully you don't do that. All right, here we go. For examples, BaCl2.2H2O. Okay, so let's work through this. First thing we check is Ba. Okay, so barium, and we're gonna write that down. So we're gonna write down barium, and we gotta check to see, does barium need a Roman numeral? Okay, so let's go to the periodic table. And we'll go ahead and zoom in here. All right, so take a look over here. There's barium on the left. So here's barium. Barium's a +2. No choices. No choices means no Roman numeral. Okay, so no choices means that you don't use a Roman numeral. So we're going to slide back. So it's barium. Doesn't get a Roman numeral, so I leave it barium. The Cl would be chlorine, but we're going to change that to chloride. Wrote a little too big there, so let me switch that up real quick. So that's going to be barium chloride. Okay, so barium chloride. And now the new thing, dot 2H2O. So the prefix for 2, and you just learned this, you probably don't remember it, is di. So it's going to be di. And then I'm replacing the water with hydrate. Dihydrate. So the dihydrate means 2 water. So barium chloride dihydrate. So take a look at this one. FeCl3. Okay, so we have iron. Let's write in iron. Okay, so go back and look at our periodic table. I'm going to check out iron real quick. Good practice to always check the elements for whether they need Roman numerals. So here we go. Here's iron. Zoom in again. There's iron right there. It can be a +2, a +3, or a +6. So it's a 2, a 3, or a +6. That means we need a Roman numeral. Okay, so let's go through and let's do that. Let's identify the Roman numeral. And the Roman numeral here is going to come from right there, the 3 next to the chlorine. So it's Roman numeral 3. So iron 3. And then we've got chlorine again. So it's going to be another chloride. Makes it easy. And then 6H2O. So the prefix for 6, you can look it up. It's back on the last thing we did. So right here. So it's right there, hexa. So we're going to go iron 3 chloride, and that's going to be hexa hydrate. So hexa for the 6, hydrate for the water, right? Okay, magnesium sulfate heptahydrate. Okay, so we're going to have to crisscross these two. So that's going to be, put it down here, it's going to be Mg plus 2, and sulfate, you can look it up on your chart, SO4 minus 2. So it's a 2 and a 2, plus 2 minus 2. So we want to remember that these guys are going to cancel. So it's going to be MgSO4. And then heptahydrate, it's going to be a dot. So a dot. I'm trying to get a decent looking dot here. A dot. And hepta is 7. So 7H2O. So there's the magnesium sulfate. And then there's the 7H2O, the 7 coming from the hepta, the H2O coming from the hydrate. And last, sodium sulfate, so no Roman numerals. So sodium, we're just going to look that up. You look up sodium, and it's a +1. And we just did sulfate, right? So we don't have to look it up again. It's hanging out right there. SO4 minus 2, crisscross. So the 2 is going to move, and the 1's going to move. So we don't write down the 1's. It's going to go there. But then 2 hangs out there. So we don't care about the 1. So it's going to be Na2SO4. Okay, deca, like a decade, is 10. And then the hydrate. So dot, and I'm going to put it down on the next line, 10 H2O. Okay, so to kind of sum up here, you've got various rules, and you need to know which rule to use for what situation, okay? So I think you can do that fairly easily with a set of steps. And you might want to write these down. And so I'm going to just give you kind of a flow chart that will help you. So I think it's easiest just to kind of run through and kind of determine based upon some various quick rules. So number 1. So Does your chemical start with hydrogen, which is H, or have acid in the name? Have acid in the name. Okay, you ask yourself that question. If yes, you got an acid. And you would stop and name it with the acid rules. Okay. Number 2. Got a different color. Number 2. Does it contain dot and then a number and then H2O, or have hydrate in the name? That'd be check number 2. So again, if yes, then you got to hydrate. Okay, not too tough. Okay, number 3, different color. Let's go back to blue. So number 3 would be, does it have a metal? Do you have a metal in there somewhere? Okay. If yes, you got an ionic compound. So ionic compounds, ionic compounds are the first day rules. That's the first day rules. That's the first thing we did. Those are the most common, all right? And then last, if it's no to everything, it's going to be molecular, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and say number 4, if all knows, if everything else fails, it's molecular. But you do have some checks for molecular. So it'd be 2 not metals or prefixes in the name. If you have these situations, then what you got is molecular. And so the molecular rules would go there. So kind of a little flow chart. And so kind of the way it would work is just, you do 1. If that doesn't work, you slide down to 2. If that doesn't work, you slide down to 3. If that doesn't work, you slide down to 4. It has to be one of these, right? So the way you do is you decide, do I have an acid? Yes or no. Do I have a hydrate? Yes or no. Do I have ionic? Yes or no. And then last, if everything else is a no, then I have a molecular compound. So that's a great way to look at it. So, all right, you guys have these practice problems right here. I want you guys to try these. First thing I would do is identify the compound type. So you have the ones we've talked about: acid, molecular, hydrate. I don't think there are any ionic on here. These are all going to be the new ones. So it's going to be one of those. So you can kind of go through. So, if I look at this number 2, it says the word acid. So I would type an acid in there, and then I'd use my acid rules to figure out the formula. Okay. This says hydrate. Okay, well, that's pretty easy. This has to be a hydrate. So now I use my hydrate rules over here. So that's what I want you guys to do. Work on those. And I'm going to pause the video here. I know it's long, 3 videos to get through this, but there's not a ton of practice stuff here. And so get those done, and we'll be ready to go.